Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast 5 Minute Frights, wherein, give or take 5 minutes, we'll try to share something creepy, kooky, mysterious, spooky, something fun and frightful that you can add to your to-watch queue as we all get ready for Halloween season.
My name is Bernie Gonzalez, and on this episode, co-host Pete Charbonneau is sharing one of his recent favorites.
The story of Dracula on the last voyage of the Demeter. Evil is on board.
We call him Dracula.
Where the bloody hell is it?
Search the ship everywhere.
I want to kill the thing. Kill it. We can't even find it. I am aware of this because that's one of my favorite chapters from the book.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things that always was really interesting to me as a kid reading Frankenstein, reading Dracula, is that journal aspect of it. And I think that helped me wrap my head around something so fantastical. This is actually grounding it, because if you have Harker talking about his experiences in a journal, maybe the supernatural elements, because they're being documented, feel slightly less supernatural. You can maybe believe. And that one scene, that chapter, the Demeter, I was like, wow, I can feel this. And when I think of submarine movies, and not movies that take place on submarines, but those movies that are very much like one location, Die Hard, those movies that don't allow the characters to escape and they have to figure out how to survive, that always reminded me, like that chapter, you've got a bunch of people on a boat and you've got this creature, a vampire on a boat, and you can't go anywhere. Luckily, it sounds like you were able to see an adaptation of that chapter with Dracula Voyage of Demeter recently.
I did, yeah. I'm curious, though, because it's been an age since I've read Dracula. That chapter, is it just all like captain's log entries? Is that
from what I remember? Yes, and especially because it keeps the plot moving. Because after Harker has done all the business for Dracula, right, and he's now going to move everything to London. It's literally, and again, this is where, like, in my teen kid brain, I'm like, this actually makes sense. Like, he's got to have the dirt from his homeland, so he's got to transport that to London, and he's doing it on a boat. This is logical. That's how you would do it. Like a movie that we've talked about is The Relic. That scene with the chimera creature that ends up coming to Chicago to the museum, that scene in the beginning of the boat being discovered in the dock and Tom Sizemore as the detective. Here's a boat, except everyone's dead. So now, like, we have to work back, like, what happened. And in the Demeter, at least in the chapter, the way I remember it, the news is documenting that this boat arrives in the bay, and all that's on there are a bunch of coffins filled with dirt. So, you know, they'll go to the address they're supposed to go to. But all of that just, again, struck a chord with me as a kid.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You know, I had heard mixed things about this film, but I am a sucker for, you know, a certain type of period piece. And I kind of liked the hook that they were going with. Kind of taking, again, what I believe is a pretty short chapter in Dracula, and kind of, what if we just kind of expand upon like what happened? Because you never, other than the journal entries in the book, you really don't find out. And the films, I don't think, explored all that much either. Like I have a very vivid remembrance of Nosferatu with like the ship kind of just coming in.
Absolutely.
Very creepy. There's rats on board, and that's it. And
and that iconic shot of, you know, Orlok kind of coming up from almost like this mystical fashion, just being kind of elevated. Absolutely.
So there was something that was intriguing me about it. And, you know, and I was like, well, I want to give this a shot. Like I'm all for kind of taking this idea and I was curious too, because knowing the story, obviously no one survives. So it's like, okay, so how are they going to do this? Because we know Dracula makes it to England, you know, embarks on his reign of terror from Carfax Abbey. So it's like, all right, so is there going to be anything new here? Is there going to be something interesting? Because we know the ending. And so how do you then build back from there? And I would say that this is a really solid B movie. Visually looks really good. Directed by...
You'll be a better man for pronouncing his name than I will.
I'm going to attempt to say Andre Overdahl. who did Troll Hunter. And that is something that I have not seen, but I always hear it mentioned in very high regard.
You won't be disappointed, Pete, when you watch it. Troll Hunter, great movie, good looking film too.
Yeah. And same with Voyage of the Demeter. It's like a really good looking film, solid actors. I won't say that it's really scary. The Dracula character is more, it's like a very feral, bat-like creature for much of the film.
Okay.
But they do some interesting things with it. I liked the interplay. I liked how everything kind of comes together. You've got your main character is, for the time, certainly was an outlier. You have this, trying to remember if he was schooled in Cambridge but a black doctor that is in Romania and looking to gain passage back to England. And so he is able to get himself aboard the Demeter, kind of tragically, in some ways, like you picked the wrong ship to,
sure.
to book passage on.
Yes.
But like there's distrust of him because he's not part of the original crew. Like the ship docks, and the captain, who's played by Liam Cunningham, who anyone that's watched Game of Thrones will recognize him. And so they need to recruit 3 additional hands to do this voyage. He's initially rejected because he's like, if you need a doctor, he's like, I study the stars. I'm an astrologer. I can help guide. And basically, like, the first mate, played by David Dasmalkian. Am I saying that correctly?
He was like the polka dot man, I think, in the Suicide Squad movie.
Yep. There's like distrust there, but then something happens where Clemens is this character played by Corey Hawkins, saves Captain Elliot's grandson from one of Dracula's coffin, like, that's packaged up from like falling on him. So he gets the second chance and he's on board. He has a medical background, which, when you're dealing with a vampire, may come in handy at some point on the voyage, and it does. So
there may be bleeding, there may be blood.
There could be there will be blood, and but there's no Daniel Plainfield on this on this voyage.
No milkshakes either, I bet either.
Because these are some quick hits. I won't spoil anything. The film does a good job of kind of introducing Dracula, the character, some of the lore, some of the hold that he has over some of the people that are in his sway, and it becomes a bit of a cat and mouse game and a race against time as the crew starts to understand what they're dealing with, recognizing, oh, he's basically rationing all of us to make it to England. And how do we stop him? And how do we, thwart this? I want to say, a good clip running time. Like it kind of jumps off after like a brief kind of little introduction, setting up the world, setting up the characters. And it's a pretty brisk pace throughout. And what I really enjoyed about it, because I came out of the theater being like, that was pretty good. I think I liked it. Want to think about it a bit more. Jumped on the Twitters, and our friend and frequent podcast guest, Josh Pruitt, was really raving about it. And so it really got me thinking a bit more about it. And what I really enjoyed was it sets up a world that could go forward. And maybe it adheres closely to Dracula, the lore, the novel, the films. Could also go off in a completely different direction if it wanted to. I don't know if this movie is going to get a sequel. I don't think it's done particularly great at the box office, but it's set up to continue the story. And there's a little nugget that if you are a Universal horror fan, I caught. I think I'm right in what I caught. Again, I won't spoil it here. I can see they're doing some real world building here. And I personally would like to see that world built. I don't know if we're going to get that. It could be very much a 50-50 thing. Maybe if they could produce something cheaply enough, they might be able to continue it. But again, I don't know if box office has warranted continuing this story. But I think it's a worthwhile watch. If you're a fan of the genre, if you're a fan of Dracula, it's an interesting take. It's not going to change anyone's life or anyone's world, but I really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend people checking it out.
Universal seems to have had a really hard time trying to reboot or remake the Universal monsters. It feels like they've gone at it from different angles, from something more akin to like a thriller with the Invisible Man and bringing in technology and kind of like that Silicon Valley kind of take on it. And then there was the Mummy reboot with Tom Cruise that didn't go very far. There was it Dracula Untold that seemed to have like the most steam. Like you said, if you would be interested to see more in this world because it's more of a feral, more of an animalistic Dracula, do you think it's pigeonholed itself with, I guess without spoilers, in kind of maintaining or keeping to that rendition of Dracula? Or are there things in the movie or ways where it could go where, not to say that it has to, be subservient to Bela Lugosi, but where you're like, that still would fit in that world?
So it does a couple of unique things. I think in terms of like the universal world building, I feel like this is like almost like a soft launch where like in the past they were trying so hard. Tom Cruise, you had Russell Crowe that was going to come in as Dr. Jekyll. And so that was like, we're going to build this up, and they announced it ahead of time, and we're going to do this. And it just like completely fell flat. And I feel like this has come in like so under the radar, but they still have, they've inserted the elements there to kind of expand on the universal monster world. But I think they did it in a really nice, subtle way. And to your question about the animalistic Dracula, so when you get to the end of the film, and again, I won't spoil anything, it works. A slight change. And I will just say, like, if you've ever seen the movie Mimic, it's not quite as left turn deep end as that, but it reminded me of that a little bit. And so if you don't want to talk about there and that intrigues you in any way, to see how they pull off what happens when, because it's not a spoiler to say that Dracula makes it to England. And it kind of leaves it off there, but it leaves it off at a point where, the game may be afoot if the story is allowed to continue to be told. And they've left it in a way where they could keep mining this without spoiling the overall arching Dracula story, or they could take it in a completely different direction and kind of, multiverse it if they wanted to. I think right now they're able to kind of pivot either way. Whether they get a chance to do that, I can't say.
I guess we'll find out. Hashtag Dracula Boat 2, right?